Welcome back. Last time we looked at the life of Murasaki Shikibu, author of the world's first novel, kind of. As I alluded to last time, records in history, first, last, greatest, biggest, are seldom as clear-cut as we might like them to be. There are so many nuances and history is so much bigger than we can imagine. Being definitive about anything is difficult. And so it is with our subject this time, the longest reigning queen in history. No, not Elizabeth II, who ruled for 70 years. Queen Arwa al-Sulayhi, who reigned for 71 years, kind of. To understand Arwa and her achievements properly, we have to set some sort of context. So we're going to have a short digression into the history of Islam. Now, Islam is not one monolithic faith with all Muslims believing exactly the same thing, just as there are within Christianity and probably every other religion for that matter. There are a variety of different sects and denominations. Now, it's important to get a handle on this because it's important background to Arwa and why she matters. So, Islam's leadership lineage begins with the Prophet Muhammad. When he died, the community divided over who should succeed him. Those who believed that leadership should be chosen by consensus became Sunnis, while those who believed authority must remain within the Prophet's family followed the Prophet's cousin Ali and became Shia, which is simply short for Shiat Ali, the party of Ali. Broadly speaking, Sunni and Shia are the two main denominational branches of Islam. About 85 to 90% of Islam is Sunni and about 10-15% is Shia. So for several generations, the Shia remained united under a line of imams, successors to Ali, who continued the Prophet's bloodline. But after the death of the sixth imam, a major split occurred. The majority following his son Musa al-Kazim, forming what is now called Twelver Shiism, while a small group followed his eldest son Ismail, becoming the Ismailis. This Ismaili branch eventually produces the Fatimid Caliphate in Egypt, a powerful Shia Ismaili dynasty who ruled a vast empire from 909 to 1171 CE and claimed descent from Fatima, the Prophet Muhammad's daughter, hence Fatimid. You might remember the Fatimids from my series on Byzantium. Both the Fatimids and the Byzantines competed for control of key cities and trade routes, so there were periods of open warfare. But at the same time, neither side could afford a permanent, full-scale confrontation, so they had to settle for diplomacy, truces, and carefully managed coexistence, especially when each faced other major threats like the Abbasids, the Umayyads, of Al-Andalus, or later the Seljuk Turks. Anyway, the Fatimids came out of North Africa, conquered Egypt in 969, founded Cairo, and built Al-Azhar, which later became one of the world's most important centers of Islamic learning. The empire stretched across North Africa, the Red Sea, the Hijaz, including Mecca and Medina, and parts of the Levant. As Ismailis, the Fatimid Empire had its own line of imams and a sophisticated missionary network that extended deep into Yemen and across the Indian Ocean. Now, the idea of missionary work per se isn't unusual in Islam, but what made the Ismailis different is the fact that they created a structured, hierarchical, and professional missionary network. Now, within the Fatimid line, another decisive split occurred in 1094, when rival claimants to the imamate created two new branches, the Nizaris, ancestors of today's Aga Khan community, and the Mustalis. The Mustali branch then divided again after the death of the Fatimid Imam al-Amir in 1130, and the community chose to recognize his infant son al-Tayyib as the rightful imam and placed him in occultation. Now, occultation in Shia Islam means that an imam is alive but hidden. They're no longer directly accessible, but they are still the legitimate spiritual authority. The community believes that the Imam continues to guide the world in a concealed way, while day-to-day leadership is delegated to appointed representatives. So because the Imam could no longer lead openly, the community created a new institution, the Da'i al-Mutlaq, an absolute representative who exercises the Imam's authority on earth. This single institutional choice produced the Tayyibi Mustali tradition and survives today as the Bora communities, including the Dawoodi, Sulayhi and Alawi Boras, making them the living heirs of a chain of religious decisions stretching from the Prophet's family to medieval Yemen and onward to the modern Indian Ocean world. This single structural choice allowed the Tayyibi line to survive for 9 centuries, eventually flourishing into a community of millions of people. This single structural choice was made by the 82-year-old Queen Arwa al-Sulayhi. Arwa was born between 1045 and 1048 as Sayyida Hura bint Ahmed ibn Jafar al-Sulayhi into the Sulayhid dynasty of Yemen. The Sulayhids had risen to power under her cousin Ali ibn Muhammad al-Sulayhi, who established a dynasty that recognized the Fatimid Caliph Imam in Cairo and extended its control across much of Islam. Contemporary later sources emphasize that Arwa was raised and educated to be a queen, suggesting an intentional grooming in statecraft, religious learning, and courtly culture. Chroniclers describe her as highly intelligent and well-educated. She reportedly had a strong grounding in Islamic law, Ismaili theology, and the practical arts of governance. This early cultivation of skills and knowledge was crucial. It positioned her not as a consort on the margins, but as someone whom elites around her already perceived as capable of rule. Around 1065, Arwa married al-Mukarram Ahmad ibn Ali, son of the dynasty's founder. When Ali ibn Muhammad al-Sulayhi died, al-Mukarram became ruler, and Arwa initially appears in the sources as queen consort. However, her role soon expanded beyond that symbolic position. Around 1067, Arwa and al-Mukarram began to co-rule, with Arwa increasingly involved in decisions around diplomacy, administration, and warfare. And a key turning point came when al-Mukarram was reportedly paralyzed after a campaign, forcing him to withdraw from active public life. Now, in this period, Arwa effectively took over much of the day-to-day management of the kingdom, presiding over court, directing officials, and issuing orders in the name of the Sulayhid state. Now, this phase matters because it normalized her presence at the apex of power. She didn't suddenly emerge as a ruler, but gradually, in response to necessity and with the sanction of existing dynastic and religious structures. When al-Mukarram died in 1084, Arwa formally assumed the position of regent for their son Ali, allowing her to rule in her son's name while still exercising actual power. During this regency, Arwa consolidated control over rival Yemeni tribal and urban elites, carefully maintaining a balance between centralizing Sulayhid authority and local autonomy. When Ali died around 1094, Arwa didn't give up power. Instead, she continued as sovereign, now ruling in her own right. She later married a second husband, who seems to have had a secondary role. His death around 1100 didn't fundamentally alter her position as the central figure of the Sulayhid regime. And this continuity underscores that by this stage, Arwa's legitimacy derived from personal authority and religious status as much as from former marital or maternal ties. Ruling Yemen required navigating a fragmented landscape of tribes, mountain strongholds and coastal cities, and Arwa proved to be politically skilled in this environment. One of her most consequential decisions was to move the seat of government from Sana'a to Dujibla, a town whose geography and alliances better suited her strategic needs. Dujibla overlooked territories controlled by her opponents in Zabid, giving her both a military vantage point and a base in a region whose tribal alignments she could harness. By shifting the capital, she not only improved her strategic position, but also symbolized a recentering of Sulayhid authority around her person and her court. Arwa worked through a network of loyal administrators and tribal leaders, combining patronage, religious legitimacy, and force. She appears to have used marriage alliances and negotiated truces to keep potentially rebellious tribal confederations in check, while selectively deploying military campaigns when necessary. This combination of soft and hard power enabled the Sulayhid state to remain relatively stable during her long reign. Now, Arwa's importance can't be separated from her role within the Ismaili Nizari religious network and her relationship with the Fatimid Caliph imams in Cairo. The Sulayhids were staunch supporters of the Fatimids, recognizing their imamate and incorporating their names into the Friday sermon, which is a key sign of political allegiance in medieval Islam. What makes Arwa exceptional is the degree of religious authority she herself held. She was granted the title of Huja, a huge rank in Ismaili hierarchy that designates a chief proof or representative of the imam on earth. This title was rarely, if ever, held by women, and it placed her right at the top of the missionary hierarchy in Yemen. As Huja, Arwa supervised the activities of local missionaries, oversaw religious education, and communicated directly with the Fatimid court. Her letters and the Fatimid chancery responses show a sophisticated interplay between political and religious discourse, in which she grounded her authority in both the Sulayhid lineage and her role as representative of the Imam. Arwa's reign is remembered by many later writers as a kind of golden age for Yemen, especially in Ismaili and local traditions. Part of this memory stems from her administrative and cultural initiatives. She promoted infrastructure projects like road building, improved irrigation, and urban development, which facilitated more trade and communication across her realm. She sponsored the construction and restoration of mosques, including the now famous Queen Arwa Mosque in Jibla, which became a centre of religious learning and still remains an architectural landmark. Education appears as a recurring theme in accounts of her rule. Arwa encouraged centres of learning dedicated to both religious and cultural studies, and is remembered for advocating education for both men and women. It's difficult to quantify this in modern terms, but the narrative indicates a ruler who understood that intellectual capital and religious instruction were crucial tools of governance and identity formation in a diverse society. After the assassination of the Fatimid Imam Caliph al-Emir, the 20th Mustali Imam, there was a succession crisis, with two of al-Emir's sons laying claim to the position of Imam Caliph. Queen Arwa recognized his younger son, al-Tayyib, as the legitimate 21st Imam, despite his only being 2 years old. What this meant was that she affirmed the continuity of the Mustali Imamate through al-Tayyib and rejected the alternative claim that backed the older son in Cairo. The importance of this decision, made when Arwa was well into her 80s, wouldn't immediately become clear. She took a stand in a succession crisis, and that choice shaped the future of an entire branch of Ismailism. Tayyibi tradition holds that al-Tayyib went into occultation, and that Arwa, as his Huja, his chief representative, remember, announced and organized the community around this new reality. Remember, in this framework, the imam is alive but hidden. Authority must therefore be mediated through deputies rather than a visible reigning imam at court. This was a theological and institutional innovation. It fused Ismaili doctrines of imamate with a structure of long-term concealment, requiring a new model of leadership to sustain religious and communal life. So, to manage this, Arwa established the office of the Da'i al-Mutlaq. In practical terms, Arwa effectively separated religious leadership from direct political rule and created a clerical style system that could survive changing dynasties and geographies. In the Ta'ibi community, the innovation was received as a necessary and legitimate solution to the succession crisis after Al-Emir's death and the emergence of these rival claims. Outside that community, however, the move wasn't universally accepted. Other Yemeni rulers didn't adopt Ta'ibi Ismailism, and the community lacked strong political patronage after Arwa's death. It was highly successful internally, but it didn't become a universal solution in Yemen's broader political landscape. But the fact that the Ta'ibi missionary structure survived the fall both of the Fatimids and the Sulayhids is pretty clear evidence that the innovation worked. The office gave the community continuity, hierarchy, and portability, allowing it to spread beyond Yemen in later centuries. Because the Ta'ibi line is the only surviving branch of Mustali Ismailism, the institutions Arwa set up are the reason that this tradition continued at all. After the Fatimid state collapsed in Egypt and rival branches disappeared, the Ta'ibi communities traced their continuity through the chain of Dais al-Mutlaq, rooted in Arwa's initial arrangements in Yemen. That makes Arwa not just a notable queen, but a foundational architect of a living religious tradition. She didn't just support a tradition that already existed, she helped redesign it so that it could continue under new historical conditions. Without that shift, the Ta'ibi branch of Mustali Ismailism likely wouldn't have survived in the same way, because it would have lacked a recognized source of authority and an organized chain of leadership. Think of it like this. A queen can be important because she rules a kingdom. Why is there no queendom? But Arwa was important in another sense too. She helped build the framework that kept her faith community alive and coherent after the kingdom's political world changed. She was a sovereign, but she was also the builder of a religious continuity, and she's remembered in these two very different ways. Arwa is often treated as a symbol of Yemen's own pre-modern greatness, especially in accounts that emphasize that Yemen once produced a powerful female ruler, urban development, and a capable state. In local memory tied to Jibla, she's associated with the Queen Arwa Mosque, her burial site, and the old palace in the town. So she isn't only a name from books, but part of the physical landscape of Yemen. That makes her a kind of historical anchor for Yemeni pride. She represents statecraft, piety, in a period of relative order and prosperity. She's also used in modern conversations about women and power in Yemen. Some contemporary writing contrasts her with present-day hardships faced by Yemeni women, using her as evidence that female leadership isn't foreign to Yemeni history. In a sense, she functions both as a historical figure and as a symbolic resource in debates about gender, legitimacy, and national identity. Arwa died in 1138 and is buried in Dujibla. With her death, the Sulayhi dynasty soon declined and Yemen entered a more fragmented phase, but her reputation as a wise and just ruler persisted. In some modern Ismaili communities, she remains a model of female leadership and religious devotion, remembered in sermons and educational material. Historians of Islamic and gender history have increasingly taken her as a case study for how women could, under particular institutional and doctrinal conditions, attain high levels of political and religious authority. Her life complicates simplistic claims that Muslim societies have never been governed by women. Instead, she invites a more nuanced, question about when and how structures of authority permitted or constrained female rule. She wasn't unique. Other women occasionally ruled as regents or in exceptional circumstances, but her combination of long duration, broad territorial control, and high religious rank is extremely rare. Taken together, these elements make Arwa a crucial figure for understanding not only Yemeni and Ismaili history, but also broader questions of how authority, legitimacy, and gender intersect in pre-modern Islamic societies. Modern scholars have noted that some contemporaries and later writers tried to normalize her rule by emphasizing traits like piety, modesty, and devotion, while others stressed her decisiveness and even martial values, painting her as more masculine. These divergent depictions again show the tensions around female sovereignty and the attempts by later, usually male writers, to rewrite her story. Arwa's leadership was substantial enough that it couldn't be easily erased. Instead, it had to be reinterpreted in ways that fit various ideological agendas. But these efforts at reinterpretation have ultimately proven limited in their success. The breadth and consistency of historical evidence attesting to Arwa's authority, her direct governance, and her political decision-making make it very difficult to confine her legacy within narrowly gendered frameworks. Later narratives tried to soften or recast her image, but they couldn't fully obscure the reality of her sovereignty, visible in administrative records, architectural patronage, and contemporaneous accounts. As a result, modern scholarship increasingly recognizes these reinterpretations not as accurate reflections of her rule, but as revealing artifacts of the anxieties surrounding female power. Rather than diminishing her legacy, such efforts underscore the extent to which Arwa's authority challenged the prevailing norms, but resisted erasure. I really enjoyed researching this one. It was really interesting to learn more about the history of Islam and how, with one decision made almost at the end of her very long life, Arwa had such an impact on part of it. I hope you enjoyed it too. Join me next time as we head north to much chillier climes than Yemen to look at the life of a contemporary of Arwa's, Hildegard of Bingen, a German Benedictine abbess, visionary mystic, composer, writer on medicine and natural science, and an influential preacher across medieval Europe. Until then, please do feed the algorithm by clicking like, share, and subscribe on your way out. And whatever you're up to, have a great day.